Welcome to another edition of the Keep Africa Trading podcast coming from TradeMark Africa. My name is Moses Kemibaro and I'm your host. We're here in Kigali, Rwanda, where we are attending the Africa Trade Development Forum. And more importantly, during this forum, we've been focusing on digital trade and looking at how it enhances trade across the African continent. But more importantly, with a multi-stakeholder audience and participation, we really got a chance to zoom in and see how digital trade can become a reality across the board for all stakeholders. My next guest basically is joining us from Uganda, and he's also a member of the Trademark Board. And more importantly, he's going to give us some perspectives that we think are relevant to this conversation around digital trade and what we've been discussing here at the conference. So thank you so much for joining us, Sanjay.
Thanks, Moses. Always a pleasure talking to you.
Yeah. So give us some background, because I'd like to know a little bit about your role, what it is that you do, and how it is that you are in the Trademark Board.
Great. So my name is Sanjay Rughani. I am actually a Tanzanian. As you know that I'm the CEO for Standard Chartered Bank in Uganda. I've been with the bank for the last 26 years. When you think about Standard Chartered Bank, then you need to say this is the biggest trade bank in Africa.
Oh.
We are also the biggest foreign exchange bank in Africa.
Okay.
Our business model is Asia, Africa, Middle East. And when you think about trade from Africa's context, a lot of our trade happens between Asia and Middle East. So we are very core to the whole trade environment, the trade development, financing trade, digitizing trade. Banks also digitize. We bring in new products. If anything, as Standard Chartered Bank, and I'll get to TradeMark Africa, for Standard Chartered Bank, we recently did a research paper which actually talks about the new corridors.
Okay.
And the new corridors for trade are, there are new emerging markets that are happening, but largely around Asia, Africa, and Middle East, which is where the biggest opportunity for us lies. What we've also talked about are the new trade agreements that have taken place. Trade is moving at a completely amazing pace. Consumption in the world is growing, and as consumption grows, new relationships grows. Now, as the world also becomes fragile from a supply chain because of the war, geopolitical tensions, business doesn't stop. So to undertake new business, new agreements, new transactions, new MOUs are being signed. And what Standard Chartered says is just continue to be relevant, focus on what is happening and what the future is. It also touches on new financing opportunities. We talk about blended finance. Of course, we do the trades and guarantees, but a lot much more emphasis now on sustainable finance. And when it comes to trade, 25% of Africa's emissions actually come from trade. So there's a massive opportunity for us to look at how do we reduce carbon emission, green trade, and that really brings in financing, which is more value financing. It's a long-term financing, and it's really about creating long-term impact for Africa. So Standard Chartered very privileged. We facilitate a lot of trade. In essence, we cover most of the world markets. We do multi-currencies. So literally, Africa has the benefit of having us, as a key enabler. Now, moving on to TradeMark Africa, absolutely privileged to be on the board. It's a brilliant organization. I call it a blessing for Africa, because Africa in many ways is constrained without organizations like this. What does TradeMark Africa do? There's many things you may have heard. I'm going to create a very simple version. One, we unlock problems. And we have a lot of problems. When it comes to 54 different countries, the whole different languages, different cultures, thinking about different evolution of our history is not easy. It's very, very complex. So that is, we unlock the problems. The second thing we really do is we unlock opportunities. The world is changing. It's becoming more dynamic. There's a lot of opportunity to innovate, to transform. And I think Africa has huge potential to grow, in essence. We've always been talking about the Africa Continental Free Trade Agreement. It's more than a $3 trillion opportunity, But when do we stop talking and getting into the move? And that's what TradeMark Africa does, because it brings people onto the table and say, let's forget we all have some local context. Let's create a continental context and become enablers. There's always going to be some lose, some win. But ultimately, as a continent, the number is so big. So you need to also think about that your market is not your local terrain. Your market is actually Africa. And so let's unlock. I think the other thing, Trademark Africa does is we've just talked about digitization.
Correct.
And that's really big. I was very fortunate. I had a panel myself, and I was talking about a bite of the market. And a bite in this case is not BITE but BYTE.
Mm.
My session had some very powerful speakers. We had members of chambers of commerce from Kenya and from Ghana. We also had the Minister of Trade and Industry from Namibia. We had the CEO of the Rwanda Development Bank, and we had Florian, who is from ITC. They've done a whole research on trade. They've done a survey on 7,600 organizations. I think the reality is when we think about business now, those that do not adopt technology, I say that they have a limited shelf life. When you go to a supermarket and it says best before. So if you don't have technology, you should start asking yourself, I'm best before by when? Because clearly we know that from the world, if you just think about last 10 years, currently digital trade is close to $6 trillion per year. In Africa, it is about $75 billion. So we are talking about a 1.2, 1.3% business that we have in Africa. Now, clearly, the economies that have really thought about technology as the foundation, I call it the common denominator. If you think about technology as a common denominator, and that's what the bite of the market means, that in all your thinking, whether it is health, education, of course, trade, financing, human impact, last mile value chain, supplies of products and services. Everywhere, if you think about technology as an enabler, our decisions have the opportunity to scale business at much more faster pace. Actually, the world every year has been growing at 9% when it comes to digital trade. The overall GDP growth over the last 10 years has been about 7% on digital trade. But as Africa, we are constrained. There is progress. We cannot say no. We had brilliant examples today from Rwanda, Tanzania, Namibia. People on my panel talking about what's happening in Ghana, where they're integrating chambers of commerce in university. My friend from Kenya said we have the youngest population in the world. It is the only population that can be trained, they can learn, unlearn, relearn. Because once you are an old population, it's very hard to train them. So how do we digitize this population to take the advantage of the global opportunities? That is what we talked about. The minister from Namibia talked about, how do you think, everything from a perspective of the bigger African market, not just your local market. And our friend from Rwanda, the director of Development Bank, Rwanda Development Bank, she said, Rwanda's strategy is to become a knowledge-based country. It's about brains. It's not about muscle power and what you have. If you don't have the brains, you really don't optimize on what's available. So I think, whilst the overall couple of days, talking about unlocking the potential through digital innovation in the Africa Development Forum 2024 was fantastic because it brought a lot of common themes that came out. We looked at issues of infrastructure because we need to be much more penetrated from a technology perspective. We looked at issues of skill. We looked at issues of capital. We looked at issues of platforms, which are very, very necessary. We looked at regulations and policies, which are also critical. But most importantly, we looked at the opportunity of collaborating with private sector. Because private sector, is not about talk show. They are about, let's get going. So I think next time onwards, we'll have a much more bigger representation of private sector. I think one big key takeaway, if you heard, our chair of TradeMark Africa spoke about is also how do we create that mindset shift? And the mindset shift is, don't be local, but be rather glocal. Global and local, glocal. Which is very important. That's my phrase, by the way, because then you can think about a much bigger market that is enabled. I think the other things were very powerful speakers. There was a lot of research, real evidence. We also saw a lot of innovation that has taken place and the progress it's making. So how can we encourage that kind of innovation to scale up much faster? So it was a brilliant conference. I think I've shed light with what Standard Chartered brings in, what TradeMark Africa brings in. And now that's the reason I am in the TradeMark Africa board, because as a bank we enable trade, and the ambitions of TradeMark Africa are to enable trade.
Fantastic. So I'd like to maybe switch gears and talk a little bit about the future.
Sure.
Looking ahead 5 to 10 years, the context of trade in Africa from a digital, maybe even a non-digital perspective, what are you seeing?
So I think if we just talk about potential and opportunity, which we have always done, now it is much more clearer that the opportunity is much big. And most of the economies need to start adopting technology as an enabler, as part of the strategy. If you are doing your 5-year development plan, that is very critical. The other opportunity and what I see as a reality is the whole area of PPP, private public sector partnerships.
Yeah.
Because that's a big enabler. The private sector is where the capital is. They have the money. We have the interventions as TradeMark Africa. The government holds the pen in unlocking, from a policy perspective. So I see that is going to be much bigger. The other thing we talked about is that development is happening at a much more drastic pace now. If you see the global statistics, 50% of all the retail consumption is happening digitally. When you think about Africa, is very limited. So if we had platforms like Jumia, we're all talking to Alibaba, but if you create an Africa-centric platform, now that we are going through, the other reality is Africa Continental Free Trade Agreement. Once these agreements are signed, how do we just optimize on the opportunity that it creates? So these e-commerce platforms are critical. The agreement from an Africa Continental Free Trade Agreement is very critical. So these are big realities that we have. And everybody as leaders who are involved in decision making need to play big. Just between now and maybe taking 2 years later, the size of digital business can actually double. The number of jobs it can create is amazing. The amount of skills it can create and capacity is brilliant. Africa is a net consumer. We import more than we export. So how do we do that within ourselves?
As a starting point.
Yeah. We also talked about intra-Africa trade at about 15%. Imagine the upside to it is incredible. So these are things that I see as the future. From a TradeMark board perspective, we are very privileged that our partners, the development partners who we work with, are very bullish. They feel the opportunity in Africa is big, but more importantly, that TradeMark Africa is a big enabler. So they are supporting us. We are expanding. We have expanded our team. You saw this kind of conference happens with a lot of intentionality. It's a very strategic, conference. You've seen our new chair, very dynamic. So I see that from a futuristic perspective, we will have a lot much more pressure as board, because the size of the bite is very big for us to chew, and we'll have to scale up capacity. We'll have to have bigger ambitions. We'll have to do much more bolder work. It's exciting and it's challenging because we sometimes block ourselves within Africa. So we've got to build the right kind of trust, and we've got to build the right kind of alliance so things can be unlocked. So great opportunity in the future.
So as we come to the end of our conversation, I think there are two things I'd like to ask you.
Sure.
One is there anything else you think our audience needs to know or should know that is important to them from a trade perspective and possibly a TradeMark perspective and even a Standard Chartered perspective? And the second thing is, what is it that motivates you or inspires you about being a board member? within TradeMark and the impact that you're having on the continent?
Yeah, so I am hoping that people who listen to me are people who are really committed to trade, committed to digitization, committed to Africa and the growth potential it has, like I am. I did say one thing today that, a few years ago I was asked, what is the size of digital economy within East Africa? And I went to the stage and I started putting $1, $10, $100, $10,000. I went on and on and on, just on a PowerPoint. And my last number was $10 billion. And I looked at all the leaders and I said, it is the first time in the world that the world is equalized from a technology perspective. What China can do, America can do, actually Africa can do. What we need is to choose what is our number. Because if we all choose a number, if it's $10 billion, and put our efforts to achieve that, it is very possible. It is not, like industrial time when you have to manufacture goods. Technology the opportunity is massive. So if the listeners are looking at me, I think is in every country, we just need to have that big number in our mind and put all our efforts towards the big number. So if, I would say then that is the alignment, and we probably need to have a big number alignment for Africa. If everybody's mind and attention is one, and we all unlock, there were two words that were used. If you can enable and empower. If you enable to reach that number or empower people who can do it, if not you, then you can hit that fast. So that's really a big thing for me as an African myself. What motivates me? Your question was what motivates me too?
Well, what inspires you, motivates you,
in
drives you about
generally?
being, well, it could be in life, but also in terms of your role as a board member at TradeMark.
Okay. So there are many things that, motivate me. One is I look at the history of TradeMark Africa is all about, it's an enabling organization. As a CEO, I'm called the Chief Enabling Officer. I see TradeMark Africa as a Chief Enabling Organization when it comes to trade. Then it is the quality of the people you meet. I mean, look at today, we had, in the last couple of days, 15 odd ministers, so many diplomats, so many business leaders, but all who have been very successful. When very successful people meet, we have to create bigger magic. We have to drive bigger success for our continent. And I think there is a bigger purpose here. So that's the second thing that motivates me. I think the third thing that motivates me is that to unlock the potential of Africa, we've got to be bold. And I find TradeMark Africa is very bold. Like Standard Chartered is very bold. We take bold decisions and we transform. So that's exciting.
Fantastic. And I think that's a perfect note to end our conversation. Sanjay, thank you so much for sharing. We're grateful for the opportunity to talk to you and to share your insights. And I'm also glad to have learned more about the footprint that Standard Chartered has when it comes to trade financing across the continent. And we're looking forward possibly to having another conversation with you in the future.
Thanks, Moses. Always a pleasure.
Yeah.
You stay blessed.
So there you have it. Sanjay has given us incredible insights as a board member of TradeMark, also as the MD of Standard Chartered in Uganda. And more importantly, I think as a Pan-Africanist, somebody who's looking at the continent and seeing what the opportunities are, especially from a digital trade perspective, it really is exciting to see the possibilities going forward through the eyes of somebody like Sanjay. So thank you very much for joining us for this edition of the Keep Africa Trading podcast coming from TradeMark Africa. My name is Moses Kamibaro. I've been your host, and we hope we'll catch you in the future for another conversation. Thank you.